Feeling like a shark in a shrimp tank. Big fish, small pond in the shrimp tank.
Welcome back to another episode of the Shrimp Tank. We come to you virtually here in the great Pacific Northwest and, of course, Seattle. If you want to learn how to start, grow, or run a successful business, this right here is the podcast for you. We call it the podcast of record. This is where we say street smarts and book smarts collide. Hello again, everyone. I'm Dan Whedon, and I'm joined by my co-host, the incomparable Michelle Baumberger, back-to-back weeks. We'll talk about that in a minute. Our guest today is Lizzie Mintus. Lizzie is the founder and CEO of Here's Waldo Recruiting, a boutique recruiting firm with a niche focus in the video game industry. Lizzie is recognized as an ambassador for Women in Games, an organization aimed at empowering and elevating girls and women in the global gaming arena. Here's Waldo Recruiting was established during the early pandemic in July of 2020. I think I'm going to want to learn more about that as well. Lizzie strives to transform the recruitment experience, ensuring every client and candidate feels genuinely valued and understood. Lizzie, welcome to the show. We'll be with you in just a minute. Everyone, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. We're on iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, Stitcher, YouTube. I like to say we are ubiquitous. We come to you from about a dozen cities, including the mothership in Atlanta. Now, listen, before we bring on Lizzie, I am excited to bring on back-to-back weeks, Michelle Baumberger. Michelle, how you doing?
I'm great. It's good to see you again. I like the new shirt.
You do,
Shrimp Tank
yes.
shirts.
I'm very happy, and yours is on the way. So you'll have yours coming soon. I like the new shirt too. I'm excited about that. We might have to have something where we can get these to all of our listeners. They can get some if they like. It's back-to-back weeks. We had a little bit of flipping around with, I think, Craig and some of the other hosts. So it's great to have you back-to-back. Something happened yesterday in the golf world, and I'm a golfer and I'm an avid golfer, and I follow the PGA and all of that. And obviously big news came with the merger of PGA and rival Live Golf. And I'm not going to bore you and Lizzie talking about golf today, but one of the things that I think made this so shocking to everybody was that nobody had an inkling. And today, in today's world of social media and internet and all of that, there's always seems to be a little bit of a leak getting out there in advance, so people at least have heard something's coming. I was shocked. Nothing came out. There must have only been like 3 people, I think, involved. But it made me think, Jay Monahan, the CEO, has taken a lot of arrows. He's being called non-communicative. That people should have known, but I think if people knew, this merger wouldn't have happened. I want to get your perspective on the importance of discretion, the importance of sometimes leaders have to kind of go into their own little vacuum in order to make deals and negotiations and important issues get done.
Well, I would guarantee that there were more than 3 people who knew about this, just based on the backdrop of the legal world and what needed to happen in order to get this deal done. And so, the questions are like, how do you engage the right people at the right time and put the right tools in place to incentivize folks to kind of keep quiet and keep things, under wraps. Ultimately, I think, you mentioned this earlier, what is best for the industry? What is best for the company? And, the communication itself is a big piece of that, right? How do you think about what you're trying to get folks to do, and how do you communicate in a way to ensure that they understand and commit to those important tactics? So, but wow, that is huge news.
Yeah. And, like I said, taking the heat and bosses and leaders and CEOs often have to take heat. And I remember being on the school board and knowing things that other people didn't know because they couldn't. And, it can be a lonely place, but what should not be a best kept secret, what should be told to the world is when there are really intelligent, smart, capable people who want to get recruited into jobs that they're absolutely going to love. We need people like Lizzie Mintus here helping us out. Lizzie, welcome to the show. I'm curious about two things. Number one is if you have any comments about our little banter that we had here, and bring some thoughts to it. And then I want to find out how you got into this world of recruiting people and exactly what Here's Waldo Recruiting does. So Lizzie, welcome.
Thank you for having me. On the discretion, I think as a business leader, you always have so many thoughts going on in your head, and you always have a bigger picture overview. And sometimes traditionally business leaders are visionaries. I know this about myself, and you go kind of 100 miles an hour and you have all these different thoughts and ideas. So yes, for merger and acquisition, but I think you also have to tone back what you're conveying to your team, because you might have an idea you want to implement in 6 months, and it might kind of throw them off track, but you have kind of a master plan. And then Here's Waldo was started in the pandemic, and we really focus on quality over quantity. So I worked for a recruiting company in the past, a agency, and they were really focused on metrics and how many people you're reaching out to. But for me, recruiting is always about the quality of your relationships and your ability to kind of dig deeper and figure out a connection, and sometimes a connection other people would not have seen. So we work with the video game industry. That is our specialty. And we work with companies sometimes that are just getting started, maybe 3-4 people, all the way through a couple of thousand.
So I'm sure you get asked this all the time because the name is so cool. Where was sort of the starting point for naming the company, and how did you land on Here's Waldo?
Yes, naming is agony to me. So I knew I wanted to start my business, and it was maybe the pandemic had just started. Probably I was trying to think of a name, maybe February or March. So dark times. And I thought maybe I was pregnant at the time too. I thought I'd have a lifestyle business. I wasn't really sure what it would grow into, but I knew I needed a domain. So I have a very creative personal friend, and we were just going back and forth on names. And she suggested Where's Waldo, which was obviously trademarked. So we did Here's Waldo.
So I'm now even more impressed. I've gotten a chance to talk to you a little bit before. Now I'm even more impressed. So tell me, you started a business at the very beginning of what was going to turn out to be a global pandemic. And at the very time you were having a child. Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, I was also doing a full-blown remodel and not living in my house.
Okay. So I got to ask, if you could look back on that time now, I guess what, 2 years ago now, 2.5 years ago, how stressful, how non-stress, what was that like, especially with the uncertainty? I mean, obviously you had a child, you had a remodel, that all you kind of could grasp, but with the uncertainty of the pandemic, tell me a little bit about that time.
Yeah, I think I thrive in chaos, and I get kind of calm in stressful situations, but obviously it's a stressful thing. You have so many different things going on at one time, but in a way it's almost maybe easier if they're all going on at once, because everything's just disorganized and you have so many things that you're taking in at the same time. The pandemic, there were so many layoffs at first because no one knew what was happening. And that was a big time, but because everybody was staying at home, video games started doing really well because you couldn't go anywhere, right?
No.
And so that was a very exciting time for the video game industry, and there started to be a lot of funding and movement. And so I thought I would just start, like I told you, a lifestyle business. And then I launched my website, which was a whole detail-oriented debacle to get out the door. But I launched it, and I, changed my status on LinkedIn, and a lot of people reached out to me, and business kind of just started to come on its own.
So, you mentioned, or Dan mentioned at the beginning of the show, that you're involved in an organization focused on women in gaming. How did you find yourself as a woman in this industry? And where do you kind of see the need for change, the opportunity for women to participate in that industry?
That's a great question. So women in tech, especially women in games, is the minority. There are not very many women. I think they get looked over for leadership opportunities. And, there's just constant, maybe discrimination or, and it might not even be mean and intentional, but I think a lot of times people are not used to dealing with women at their game studio because there traditionally have not been. So it's hard from all angles. I know people definitely talk to me differently, or they think maybe I don't know a lot about what I'm talking about. And then they talk to me and they say, okay, I think you get it. So there are several different organizations. There's Women in Games, and then there's Women in Games International, not correlated whatsoever, entirely different organizations, but both of them aim to bring more women into the game industry and also support women who get in and kind of need that additional mentorship or guidance, or talking to other women who say, I've had a similar situation, here's how I dealt with it.
So I'm interested.
Just gonna do a
Go ahead,
quick follow-up on that one. What are you seeing as far as the trends of women kind of going in? You're seeing more women, I think, in computer science, you're seeing more women, kind of majoring in some of these areas, but how are you seeing that translate into job opportunities?
I think I always say this, there are three kinds of companies. There are companies that truly care about diversity and make a concerted effort. And then there are companies that say they care, but they don't care. And maybe they just want to put, something about how they're accepting and appreciate diversity on their website, but in fact, they don't at all. And then there are companies that just don't care. So I think it depends on the company that I'm hiring for. I think companies are caring more, but I don't really know how much better the numbers are getting necessarily. And there are some stats about why this happens. I think women are apparently statistically a lot less likely to apply for a job that they don't feel 100% qualified for, whereas men maybe hit 60% and they will apply. So now companies are adding statements to their job descriptions that say, Bungie does this, they do a great job. Statistically, women and people of color are less likely to apply for jobs where they don't feel they are 100% fit. If you are meeting most of the requirements, we would love to hear from you.
Well, that's really interesting. I'm curious about you personally a little bit. I mean, obviously you're in the recruiting business and it's gaming specific. What came first for you? Was it a love of gaming when you were young that just kept going? How did the marriage of those two come about for you?
Yes, I was working at a recruiting agency and I got my foot in the door by brute force. I will tell you about that, into recruiting. But I was recruiting and we had this new client, and it was a large company that wanted to start a VR lab and VR innovation lab. And so I met with them and I learned that they wanted to hire people from games. And I didn't know anything about games. I don't play games, really. I played Animal Crossing during the pandemic, but I'm not a hardcore gamer and I'm not pretending to be a hardcore gamer. But I love the passion in the industry. I worked for just tech recruiting previously. And if you're building tax software, a CRM, a database for HR managers to use, while there may be technical challenges, you probably aren't really that into it. And you're mostly into your TC or total comp. That was such a thing. What's the TC? Like, do you want to hear about the role? But in games, people love what they do. Their dream is to work on the games that they play. There are artists, there are designers, there are engineers, and they are just the most passionate people. And I love to recruit and I love to work with people that are in love with what they do. It is just so much better of an experience.
I love that passion. And I think connecting those dots around, the people who just love to be in the space because they love the space, which is super cool. So We talked a little about the beginning of the company and some of the challenges, of course, of launching at the time that you did. Let's kind of fast forward to the current environment. What would you say to, current folks in the candidate pool, people who are looking for opportunities, specifically in gaming or otherwise? What would you share with them as far as how to stand out or how to compete given the current conditions?
Yeah, I think first of all, you can get really wrapped up in the layoffs, but just in life, I think you should think about what you are personally in control of and turn blinders to all of that. Prior to about the Thanksgiving timeframe, it was completely a candidate's market. And you could say, I want to work remote. I want to work 4 days a week. I need this sign-on bonus. And the companies were bending over backwards because there was such a shortage of talent. And now there's not. And large companies who have paid people so much more have laid off so many people. These people are looking for jobs. So I think good advice, regardless of the market, really work on yourself and take your job search seriously and figure out what you can do to stand out from the crowd. So if you are an engineer, create a GitHub account, work on open source projects, create your own portfolio. Same if you're an artist, go to conferences, meet people in real life, do things on your own time that really show that you're passionate about the industry. And then when you are interviewing, this to me seems like interview 101, but is a common mistake. Research the company. And if they have an app, download the app and play around with it and talk about the features to your interviewer. If it's a game, play through the game, watch it on Twitch, see what people say about it, look into the company financials. So I think people, breeze through their resume, they have typos, then they go apply for jobs. And jobs have thousands of applicants. Your application may not get looked at, and you haven't done anything special. So of course you're not getting a reply. So take a more strategic approach to your job search and prepare, take it seriously.
Well, what we take seriously here is paying the bills, and we're going to do that by taking our first short break to hear from today's Spotlight sponsor. And when we come back with our guest, Lizzie Mintus, for our Hot or Not section of the show, we're going to talk a little bit more about interviewing and get her take on interviewing virtually. Don't walk away. We'll be right back with more of the Shrimp Tank. The power of law is often used against those who don't know what they don't know, but not anymore. Equinox levels the field for entrepreneurs. Just as your business may now tap into a managed service provider for accounting, HR, or IT help, you can now tap into the power of law with Equinox. Equinox's strategic legal counsel service gives your business the same strategic law advantages as the megacorps. But unlike the mega attorneys, Equinox brings a balance of strategic business and practical legal guidance. You set the priorities and the budget. The Equinox team builds a personalized plan at a fixed monthly cost to best serve your legal priorities and needs. Take on business complexities with the power of law on your team. Visit equinoxbusinesslaw.com and schedule a complimentary, no obligation evaluation to see where your business stands. Level the playing field with Equinox Strategic Legal Counsel.
Welcome back to the Shrimp Tank, where we interview the best and brightest CEOs and business thought leaders in the greater Puget Sound area and beyond. I'm Michelle Bomberger here with Dan Wheaton and our guest, Lizzie Mintus of Here's Waldo. For our next segment, let's kick off Hot or Not.
And Lizzie, Hot or Not is where Michelle and I are going to pepper you with questions about business, about life, about gaming. Who knows what else we'll do? I want to start. You mentioned interviewing. In the last question, right before break, you talked about interviewing, and I had this flashback. I think the first two, at least the first two interviews I ever had with companies coming out of college, and then early on, I was sitting at somebody's desk in a chair that had me lower than they were. I'm sure everybody had those, and you're nervous and you're looking up to the person and you're going through all of that. Today, things have changed, at least a little bit, I think. hot or not, virtual interviewing.
Virtual interviewing is great. You don't have to fly anywhere. You don't have to have an awkward lunch interview where you're trying to eat and answer the question. But I think there is something to be said for in person and meeting other people and seeing the way that they are in person. You really present differently.
So if you do have to do a virtual interview, maybe somebody listening to this has to do it at whatever industry they're in. Do you have a couple tips to really make that virtual interview better for you, to better magnify who you are?
Yep, I would write down some classic behavioral questions. You can use ChatGPT. You could say, prepare me for this interview. What type of, that's not the right prompt. Ask it the right prompt, right? But what kind of questions does Meta ask for engineering interviews? Give me the top 10 behavioral. And then I would write the answers down ahead of time. I would research the company. And then I just make sure that you're not in your messy bedroom with your cat walking in front of the computer screen. Just put yourself somewhere quiet where you're uninterrupted. You have your camera on, there's a light on you, and look generally presentable, please.
Amen. I think we've all been through a lot of that over the last couple of years, is, how to balance that, expected professionalism with the at-home environment and give people grace around, what they can control and what they can't control. But, owning what you can control, I think makes a difference. You just kind of kicked off another idea, that hot or not, AI in recruiting.
Yep. I think AI will change the way that we work forever. But with all of the AI creating content, and I heard AI can even conduct a recruiter interview for you now, but I think people are craving human connection even more. And maybe you'll get more messages where AI has written a message and is reaching out to you, but it's kind of bland, at least for now. So given the current state, I think it can help things, but you have to be aware people want the human connection. And then in terms of sourcing and candidate identifying, AI really knows what the internet has, and there are many discriminatory things on the internet, or maybe closed-minded. So I think that that's a big hurdle to jump over to before you really want AI to source for you, because whoever is looking at candidates is ultimately making a decision, yes or no. So that person has to have their bias checked. And if it's AI, I think in the current state, it does not.
So hot or not, Lizzie, LinkedIn, when it comes to job searching, recruiting, things like that, is LinkedIn hot or not?
The hottest.
The hottest.
Hottest
Tell me more.
LinkedIn has a monopoly. I mean, if you are searching for a job, you have to have your LinkedIn profile. You have to have it filled out with the company that you work at and your skills. At least in my tech world, I think this is prominent. I'm sure there may be in the construction industry or other places you might go on other job boards, but I love LinkedIn. Personally, I love the UI. I can see, the logos of all of the companies you worked at. The layout is just nice. And I can also see who you are connected to. And that's incredible.
We talked a little about this early on as we were kind of prepping for the show. And so I'm going to ask you, hot or not, business coaches and peer advisory groups?
Also the hottest thing. I would be so lost without, I'm in EO Entrepreneurs Organization, super helpful. I'm in an all-women CEO group as well. And business is lonely, and I think everybody has imposter syndrome, and everybody has questions that are not sexy and other people don't really want to hear about. For instance, P&L. I mean, who are you going to talk to your P&L about? Your family? No. Your friends? Really not. So it's incredible to have other people that get you and can relate to you.
So I'm going to jump off hot or not. And I want to talk a little bit about your business and the process. I mean, we've talked a lot about recruiting and jobs and all of that, but I think if I saw your website correctly, you'll work with both people who are looking for jobs and companies who are looking for people. Talk about your business, the process, whether it's somebody who's a company looking for someone or someone looking for a company.
Yeah, I think mostly we work with companies that are looking for people,
Okay.
and then we identify the people based on the companies. But sometimes we'll build long-term relationships with people and eventually hire them. So for me, I see a lot of value in having an efficient, inclusive hiring process where candidates feel good going through it. And I feel good about the company that I am representing because I do not want to put people in a terrible place. That's not my job. And so if companies reach out to me, I really like to understand their hiring process, what they say they do and what they may actually do, could be different, but I want to understand how they want to be presented, what their goals are. And then the hardest part is just getting inside whoever is hiring's head and trying to understand what they think is good. Because what you think is good might be very different than what I think is good in terms of hard skills. And for me, the hardest is art, right? If you're looking at 10 portfolios, what's a good portfolio? I have people on my team that excel at this. They love to do that, but that is not my personal skill set. And in terms of the candidate side, I have a lot of people that are fresh grads reach out to me or earlier in their career. Maybe they went through a coding boot camp or something like that. But companies are paying agencies to find a candidate that they cannot find on their own. So this probably means somebody with 5+ years of experience all the way through an executive.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because I think that the new grads may be the easiest ones to find because they're actively out there looking. And so it's this talent that's either already got a job, not maybe actively looking, that the agencies can help with. Something you mentioned earlier, the total comp conversation. What trends are you seeing right now in incentives, compensation? Like the market's shifted a lot. So what are things looking like out there?
The market has definitely shifted, and I feel awfully for people who are in bad situations due to layoffs or were laid off on a visa, but some correction ultimately was needed because things were spiraling quickly out of control. So I think people that were working at a large FANG, Mongo, whatever the acronym is, a big tech company, probably had a massive pay raise when they were hired at that company, and they have a base salary, a large bonus, and stocks if the company is public. Those companies are no longer hiring. So if you are getting a job, you are going to work at a startup or a mid-sized company. All the big companies are done. And those companies are private, so you don't have the stock component. And unless they have a product that's really doing well, a bonus is questionable. They may have a bonus, they may not. So I think people may get the base salary that they were making at a big company, maybe, but they're probably going to have to take a massive cut.
So Michelle, did you have another question? Oh, okay. So I got to believe, at least here in the Seattle area, we heard, everybody, Facebook or Meta and everybody, did your emails blow up? Did your phone literally, kind of metaphorically ring off the hook when all of these layoffs started occurring?
Yes, absolutely. Whenever there's a layoff, we have this internal Slack channel called Trouble in Paradise.
Oh.
Because when you're a recruiter, when there's a big layoff or you hear about something that's going wrong in a company, you really want to go all in and try and pull people out of that company, especially if it's a good place and you haven't been able to pull people out. So when the layoff started, a flip switched and so many companies followed suit. But people that told you how great they were doing at this big company and how they'd never want to leave, or maybe even gave you attitude, how they don't need to work with a recruiter, are now coming to you and saying, hey, I'm laid off and I really need some help. So I think it's just a great lesson when things are good or when things are bad. Keep in touch with good recruiters, keep in touch with people in your network, treat them with respect. When times are good, it's only a certain amount of time until things eventually go up and down. There are always ups and downs, there's fluctuations. So stay
And
even,
never burn bridges, right?
especially not games is a very, very small place.
Yeah.
People that I hired 6 years ago are now executives at companies I'm hiring for. I've hired the same person 3 times. I mean, everyone knows one another and everything comes back. So I think reputation is everything.
Well, we believe reputation is everything, and we think the world of the reputation of our corporate sponsors. So we're going to take our second short break to hear from those sponsors. And when we come back with our guest, Lizzie Mintus, for our Plead the Fifth section of the show, we're going to have some breaking news of our own. It's not just about the PGA Tour and Live Golf. We've got our own breaking news. Don't walk away. We'll be right back with more of the Shrimp Tank. And Plead the Fifth is brought to you by our corporate sponsors, Ideal Life 360, Cornerstone Financial, First Underwriters Insurance, BC Fitness Studio, Port Ludlow Resort, and Upstart Group. Please visit our website at www.shrimptankpodcast.com/Seattle to learn more about these terrific companies. Now back to the show.
Thanks, Dan. Welcome back to the Shrimp Tank, where we interview the best and brightest business thought leaders in the Seattle area and the greater Puget Sound. I'm Michelle Bomberger here with Dan Wheaton and our guest, Lizzie Mintus. We're going to kick off Plead the Fifth next. Are you ready?
Ready.
Well, and I'm going to plead the fifth. Normally, we're going to ask a hard-hitting question first, but I learned something in our pre-pod interview, and I'm really excited about this. And I asked if we could break the news, because I think it's been silent so far, a lot of discretion, but let's break the news. I'm going to put it this way: plead the fifth. Do you, Lizzie Mintus, have a podcast that will soon be coming out?
I sure do.
Tell us about it.
Right. Yes, I am launching the Here's Waldo podcast, where we interview executives, entrepreneurs, thought leaders in the video game industry, and hear a bit more about their journey, how they've gotten to where they are today, and what the future holds for them.
That sounds fantastic. And I can just say, from our brief time together today, you're going to make a terrific podcast host.
Thank you.
I can't wait to hear it as well. Something that's come to mind as we were talking today is the kind of how to prepare yourself to be in the marketplace. I'm wondering what advice you would give yourself, as you were starting out in your career. Anything that you would say to your 18-year-old self?
Well, when I was 18, I had a job at Nordstrom, which I thought was a great job at the time. I was working in sales, but I was pretty lost about what I wanted to do long term. But I built so much character and I learned a lot. So I think a tough job, which you might not always appreciate when you're working long hours and weekends and dealing with generally unpleasant people, will help you a ton in the long run. So a lot of not glamorous experiences really shape you in the future. And I really think that life works out and you kind of generally end up where you want to be. There's some fate and a lot of hard work and dedication. So just believe in the process. I think I felt frustrated and uncertain, but I ended up right where I'm supposed to be. But I couldn't see that then.
So speaking about where you're supposed to be, and it's in the gaming and recruiting industry, what do you like most and what do you like least about the industry today that you're in?
Yes. What I like least that's probably changing are people with a bad attitude who don't think that they need to be nice to a recruiter who's ultimately going out of their way to help them and prepare them to find a job that hopefully changes their life. So I have a hard time when people are rude. I always like to think that maybe everybody does not have a great social awareness, and that makes people less offensive to me. But even with that in mind, I'm still occasionally offended, but it's getting better, I think, as the economy shifts. And then,
Oh, can I ask just one thing to that before you say what you like most? Because I guess I'm shocked. I shouldn't be, but I'm shocked because I always think of somebody like you who's recruiting as helping. It seems unfathomable to me for somebody not to be nice to you. I guess that just it kind of blew my mind. I didn't mean to interrupt. I want to hear what you like, but that caught my attention.
I think people maybe have worked with a bad recruiter who has ghosted them. I hear a lot about recruiters ghosting, not following up, being uneducated about what candidates really do. So I think it's frustrating to talk to someone who's the barrier between you and the job you want, who doesn't even understand what you do. So there are some frustrations that are understandable, but like we talked about, you still need to be professional and polite and figure out how to work with them. In terms of the best thing, there are two best things and they marry together. So finding somebody a job that they are absolutely in love with, that changes their life. Maybe that's getting them a massive $100,000 raise. Maybe they can work remote so they can move back to be with their family. Maybe it's a company that is their dream company to work for, that they've always wanted to work for, or it's a company that makes a game that they love that they didn't even know how to job. So making that match is the best feeling. And I still get a high from it. It makes me so, so happy. And then you follow up with the candidate. They love it. And then when you're an agency, you get to work with many different companies. And so when their product comes out and their product has crazy success, and you know that's because of the team that you built, that is so rewarding. Everyone's raving about the graphics on some new game and you hired the graphics engineer for them. It's amazing.
That is amazing. I love the living vicariously through those experiences and watching how clients, how you can contribute to client success. So that's something that definitely resonates with me. I'm wondering if you can share who's been the most successful or influential person in your career journey?
Most influential person. I think I have three. One, Christy Johnson is an entrepreneur who's a local who you should definitely have on the podcast. And she has a women entrepreneurial leadership program, which she generously invited me to join. And that really helped me lay the foundations, doing stuff like making a business plan, figuring out my target customer, figuring out what to put on my website, figuring out how to interview my team, just the basic fundamentals. And so I completed this program, and somebody listening to the program, Janice Machala, listened to my final pitch, and she said, "Hey, I used to have a recruiting company. We should connect." She invited me to her women's CEO group, which was incredibly helpful. I felt the most imposter syndrome at the beginning, which I think is common, but all these women are so successful. I don't know why they had me join. It was overwhelming, but then I got to know them and they're amazing. And then Chris Mandarino has taken over the group, and she is very helpful, very straightforward. If I ever have a business problem, she gets it and she works with me right there and we solve it. So I am so thankful, and I would not be here today without all of their help.
So I've got to ask you, this is my last plea, the fifth. Do you have a favorite? What's your favorite game? I got to believe that you've got some gamer in you. What's your favorite game?
I truly don't play games. I run my business. I have
Okay.
2 small children, and I make time to exercise and sometimes do something social. So my days are pretty full. During the pandemic, I played Animal Crossing, which I thought was a blast. So I'm not a big gamer. I have all of the PS5, all of the devices, and I appreciate them, but that is not my passion to play them, only to hire for them.
All right, one last question. What is your reaction to the word impossible?
I think you can do whatever you tell yourself. And I'm reading a book which Hal Lamb from Seattle recommended called Just One Thing. And it talks about how you need to ask yourself a bigger question so you can give yourself a bigger answer and kind of do more. I'm very strong-willed. I was apparently an impossible child. I always had strong opinions, but no just means maybe. So I think you can do whatever you think that you can do. You just have to adjust your mindset.
Great perspective. Lizzie, thanks so much for being a guest here on the Shrimp Tank. For our listeners that want to get in touch with you, learn more about your company or about your podcast, how can they get more information?
Yep. You can email me, Lizzie at Here's Waldo Recruiting. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn, Lizzie Mintus, and you can follow my company page, Here's Waldo Recruiting. We will post updates on the podcast and tips for interviewing for jobs. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. So reach out to Lizzie, get more information, and also check out the replays of our Shrimp Tank podcast at shrimptankpodcast.com/Seattle and wherever you get your podcast. SoundCloud, iHeart, Google, and follow us on our show's social media pages on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram.
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Lizzie, for being on the show. By the way, Janice Mashallah is also a past guest on the show, so you'll have to go back through the archives and check that out. Best of luck to you on your podcast. I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. And thanks for being on the show. Michelle, back-to-back weeks. I think that means I'm not going to see you for a while, or at least until July. I think we're going to see each other sometime in July. But as always, it's been great to see you. And let me know when you get that t-shirt. We'll make sure to match up next time. Everybody else, do exactly what Michelle said. Like us on our Facebook page. You can live stream with us every Wednesday. Our next show is going to be Wednesday, June 14th. We have an outstanding slot for a guest. We'll absolutely get that filled. So stay tuned for that. But please join us. Our co-host for the show will be Linda Popke. In the meantime, please be safe, be well, and be prosperous, because until next week, the shrimp is back in the tank. So long.
I've been feeling like a shark in a shrimp tank. Big fish, small pond in the shrimp tank.